I wanted to talk some about the science of Kyoto and the science of global warming. The science comes from a group called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And it's a UN group. And I mean, these guys are very smart, and they meet every couple of years, and they're really the planet's foremost experts in climate. And I guess this started, I guess it was 1995. They come out with this wording that says there is a discernible human influence on the climate. But what I found out after that was that report had been changed. It had been edited. Any kind of skepticism about the human influence, some people don't really think there's a human influence, or they think that, well, there are too many variables, we're not really sure. That had been edited out. And that really concerns me when you've got a bunch of scientists who are supposed to be on the up and up, and somebody's changing the text after it had been approved by the panel and after it had been approved by the scientists who wrote it. And really, when it comes down to the science, you can kind of get a model to say whatever you want. One of the most interesting models to come across the pike after some time was something called the hockey stick, and it was put together by a guy named Michael Mann. It was called a hockey stick because this guy basically, he took all the temperature data that he could find for the past 1,000 years in North America and graphed it. What he said is that this century is the warmest century for the past 1,000 years. It's a hockey stick because the temperatures stay pretty stable, and then you get to the 20th century and they start zooming up by about, it's either, I don't know, 0.6 degrees centigrade or a full degree Fahrenheit. A lot. And of course, that's the same century that, we've been driving around in cars and refining oil and making plastics and all that good stuff that we like to use so much. And Mann's hockey stick was a big deal for two reasons. First of all, you've got something going against the conventional wisdom. The conventional research and the conventional wisdom said that, the climate's been a little warm and a little cool. These climatologists talk specifically about something called the medieval warm-up, or the medieval optimum, something like that. That's why Greenland is called Greenland, because in 1100 it was really a nice place to live. Now it's more like Iceland, but that name was taken. So two Canadian guys, Ross McKittrick and Stephen McIntyre, they look at Michael Mann's numbers and they find some really interesting things. And when I say interesting, I mean wrong. Sometimes McKittrick and McIntyre found that there was just an error in the spreadsheet, but that the error was so heavy it changed all the numbers for one particular year. I'm not a statistician, but a number of statisticians have really found some issues with the statistical methods that Michael Mann used. He basically threw out large sets of data, and he ended up throwing out a number of sets of data that didn't correspond with what he wanted. It was almost like he wanted a hockey stick, and his statistical method mined for data sets that gave him a hockey stick and kind of threw out ones that didn't. And what McKittrick and McIntyre really busted him on for was the bristlecone pines. And I know it's a little strange to talk about bristlecone pines, but remember, Michael Mann is going through 1,000 years of data for the northern hemisphere. You don't have 1,000 years of data for the northern hemisphere. What you've got is maybe 150, maybe 300 at best for certain areas. What you've got for other areas is trees,
temperature proxies.
Temperature proxies, and you got to go proxy after proxy. Well, there's this data set for bristlecone pines, I think in Mexico, someplace?
Northern California.
Northern California. And a bunch of people had taken a look at these tree ring widths because they had a number of years of wide tree ring widths, which means, okay, warm weather. Not necessarily. A number of scientists had looked at those bristlecone pines and said, you know what, this particular growth spurt really didn't have anything to do with global warming. And so anybody who really wanted to do a good study on global warming would have said, okay, I'm throwing these things out. It turns out he didn't. Mann didn't. He kept those bristlecone pine numbers in there when everybody knew that growth spurt had nothing to do with global warming. You know, I mean, it wasn't the case. His numbers were skewed. And really what you have, when you try to recreate the hockey stick and you do it correctly, you really have what you had before, which was various ups and downs in our climate that we can't necessarily explain. Again, with the Greenland thing, it was very warm. This is a warm century, okay? Nobody's arguing that. As I've said before, the temperature is going up. The question is, who's causing it? Is it natural or is it human-induced? You know, right now there's been a lot of talk about hurricanes, that global warming is making hurricanes, not necessarily more of them, but making them more intense. A guy named Kerry Emanuel, I think at MIT, just recently put together a study that says, oh, the wind speeds, because of a, I think it was, 1 degree Fahrenheit or 0.6 degrees centigrade increase in the temperature of the water, that was increasing the wind speed of hurricanes and making them more intense. Well, a guy named Dr. Gray, he's with, I think, Colorado State University, the go-to guy for hurricane research, looks at this study and says, are you kidding me? I mean, literally, his words were something like, this is the worst study
I'm shocked at the scholarship involved
I've ever seen, because what Kerry Emanuel did is he didn't take direct wind speed readings. He took data from, it was satellites. And so Dr. Gray is saying, wait a minute, you can't really do that. You can't take a model. It goes back to this idea of getting a model to say whatever you want to say. And what happens is you're taking shaky data. It's not direct wind speed measurements. It's something you've extrapolated, something you've estimated, putting it into an equation that gives it the heaviest weight, and then saying, boom, okay, human-induced global warming causes hurricanes. I'm not buying it. I'm not spending a lot of money for it.